Welcome to Cognitive Dose. We are here, as always, curing blind spots, cultivating intellect, and shattering cognitive bias.
Absolutely.
What if I told you that trying to achieve your biggest life goals is actually exactly what is preventing you from reaching them? Today, we are turning our analytical lens toward a text that has fundamentally reshaped modern behavioral psychology and personal optimization, and that is James Clear's best-selling framework, Atomic Habits.
Right.
The central question before us today is this. Is this behavioral framework a universal, scientifically grounded path to fulfilling human potential? Or is it a reductive, mechanistic system that willfully ignores the complex realities of human existence? I will objectively outline the book's core mechanisms of behavioral change, while my co-host, as usual, will rigorously interrogate the foundational logic, the ethics, and the systemic blindness of reducing human life to, well, algorithmic habits.
Yeah, I'll be looking past the appealing packaging. We really need to ask what happens when we try to optimize the human soul completely out of existence.
Let us begin with the foundational mathematics and philosophy of the framework, which I think is undeniably elegant. The core premise rests on the power of compounding. The book argues that habits are basically the compound interest of self-improvement.
The 1% rule.
Who do not experience a linear improvement. Because of compounding, a 1% daily improvement leaves you exactly 37.78 times better by the end of a single year.
Sure, I mean, the math is pristine, obviously, but mathematically modeling human behavior is notoriously tricky. How does the book map that elegant compound interest onto the very messy reality of human psychology?
Well, it does so by addressing why we usually fail to see those compounding returns. The framework introduces this concept of the valley of disappointment, or the plateau of latent potential.
Okay.
It uses a brilliant analogy of an ice cube sitting in a room that is 25 degrees. The temperature rises slowly, 26, 27, 28 degrees.
And nothing happens.
Right, nothing happens. The ice cube sits there unchanged. 29, 30, 31, still nothing. It is only when the temperature hits 32 degrees that the ice finally begins to melt.
Meaning the energy wasn't wasted, it was simply being stored until a phase transition could occur.
Precisely. That 1 degree shift seemingly unlocked a massive change, but it was actually the accumulation of all the stored energy from the previous temperature increases. In this explains the neurological friction we experience when trying to change. The human brain is evolutionarily wired to expect immediate linear progress.
Right, we want the reward now.
Yeah. We go to the gym for 3 days, look in the mirror, see no change, and experience a massive dopamine crash because our expectations just do not match reality. But the most powerful outcomes in any compounding process are always delayed.
Look, it is a vivid analogy, and it certainly provides a very comforting rationalization for why someone might be working incredibly hard and seeing absolutely zero return on their investment in the short term. But how does the framework propose we actually operationalize this? I mean, we aren't ice cubes.
It is operationalized through what is called the aggregation of marginal gains. The book illustrates this beautifully with the story of British cycling. So in 2003, Dave Brailsford took over as performance director. Prior to this, British cyclists had endured over a century of profound mediocrity. I mean, no Tour de France victories in 110 years and a single Olympic gold medal since 1908.
Right, they were a joke.
They were. But Brailsford didn't look for one massive physiological overhaul. He looked for 1% improvements in every conceivable area.
The famous microscopic adjustments.
Exactly. They rubbed alcohol on the tires for better grip. They tested different massage gels for faster muscle recovery. They even had surgeons teach the riders the best way to wash their hands to reduce the probability of catching a cold.
Wow.
They even painted the inside of the team truck white so they could spot tiny specks of dust that might degrade the mechanics of the finely tuned bikes.
So the premise here is that these macroscopic, world-class victories are simply the result of microscopic adjustments compounded over time?
Yes, the statistical aggregation of those tiny changes yielded unimaginable results. Just 5 years after Brailsford took over, the British cycling team won an astounding 60% of the gold medals available at the Beijing Olympics and followed it up with 9 Olympic records in London 4 years later.
Okay.
It is a stunning validation of small habits compounding into world-class performance.
I see. So if marginal gains are the goal, how does a normal person, someone without an entire staff of sports scientists, actually execute that in their daily life?
Well, that is where the framework dives deep into cognitive science. It distills habit formation down to a mechanistic loop rooted in Edward Thorndike's 1898 puzzle box experiments with cats and B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning.
Yes.
The loop consists of 4 sequential steps: cue, craving, response, and reward.
The classic stimulus-response conditioning model.
Yes, but with a nuanced understanding of modern neuroscience. The brain is effectively a reward detector. A cue triggers a craving, and neuroscience tells us that dopamine doesn't just spike when you receive a reward, it spikes in anticipation of the reward.
The craving itself is the driver.
Exactly. That craving motivates a response, which delivers a reward which ultimately satisfies the craving and reinforces the neural pathway associated with the cue.
And the framework aims to hack this neurological loop.
Right. To engineer this loop, the book presents the 4 laws of behavior change. To build a good habit, you must make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying.
Let's break down the mechanism there. How does simply making a habit obvious actually translate to behavioral change?
It drastically reduces the cognitive load on your prefrontal cortex. If you want to practice guitar, leaving the guitar in the middle of your living room makes the cue obvious. You do not have to rely on memory or willpower to go fetch it from a closet.
Sure.
Making it obvious bridges the gap between intention and action. But the deepest layer of the book's framework goes beyond mere operant conditioning. It identifies the ultimate driver of behavior change as identity.
Changing who you are rather than what you do.
Precisely. Rather than focusing on outcome-based goals, like I want to write a book, you focus on identity-based goals. I am a writer. It's like trying to navigate a ship across the ocean. The goal is the port you want to reach, but the system is the rudder and the engine.
Right, staring at the port doesn't move the ship.
Exactly. Only obsessing over the mechanics of the engine does. Every time you sit down to write, even for 2 minutes, you are running the engine. You are casting a vote for that identity. The system's brilliance lies in shifting our focus from the exhaustion of sheer willpower to the quiet efficiency of environmental design. It treats self-improvement like compound interest, prioritizing your trajectory over your current results.
Look, you have laid it out a remarkably elegant system, and I will concede that the mathematics of compounding interest are flawless. But I want to pivot our analytical lens away from the idealized mechanics of this system and examine its massive structural blind spots.
Okay.
Because when we apply this incredibly tidy, optimistic framing to the very messy reality of human life, the foundation begins to look scientifically hazardous. Let us start by revisiting your favorite anecdote, the miraculous British cycling team.
I fail to see what is scientifically hazardous about optimizing athletic performance through incremental improvement. I mean, the results at the Olympics speak for themselves.
Oh, they do speak, but they are telling a completely different story than the one the book is selling. This anecdote is a textbook case of false causality, weaponized to mask the overwhelming reality of systemic financial advantage.
How so?
Dave Brailsford's marginal gains philosophy makes for a wonderful corporate keynote speech, but it conveniently ignores a massive structural variable. Team Sky and British Cycling were suddenly backed by an unprecedented corporate budget from the National Lottery.
Well, wait, you are dismissing the premise by focusing on the budget.
Of course they had funding, but every elite team on the world stage has funding. But they were not equal in resources. That is exactly the point. They literally outspend almost every other nation on Earth. They could afford to hire the absolute best coaches, book the most expensive wind tunnels, and purchase the most advanced carbon fiber technology. Sure, but to claim that painting the inside of a team truck white or changing the brand of massage gel is the causal mechanism for Olympic gold while willfully ignoring tens of millions of pounds in surplus capital is deeply intellectually dishonest.
I think you are missing the nuance there, though. Brailsford's point is that when elite competitors are roughly equal in physiology and base training,
The differentiator is the aggregation of marginal gains. The white paint didn't win the gold alone, but it contributed to a culture of excellence.
The white paint was a luxury of surplus capital, not the cause of victory. It is scientifically hazardous because it teaches everyday people to attribute systemic, structurally funded outcomes to microscopic individual habits. And this fundamentally flawed way of measuring success bleeds into the actual psychology of the book.
I don't see how.
Because the entire framework leans heavily on the assumption that human beings can be programmed via mechanistic behavioral loops. It relies on ego depletion paradigms.
Ego depletion? I don't believe the framework advocates for that at all.
It is the ghost in the machine of the entire premise. Ego depletion is the old psychological idea that willpower is like a battery. That every time you resist a chocolate chip cookie or force yourself to focus on a spreadsheet, your willpower battery drains, leaving you exhausted and unable to make good choices later. It was popularized by Roy Baumeister's famous radish and cookie experiments.
Yes, and that theory has been a cornerstone of behavioral psychology for decades.
Except it has faced a massive replication crisis in modern psychology. Recent meta-analyses across thousands of participants have shown that the ego depletion effect is practically zero.
Oh.
Willpower is not a depleting battery. It is heavily influenced by motivation, belief, and emotion. You cannot reduce human behavioral psychology to a tidy four-step loop bypassing willpower without losing the essence of human cognition.
I must push back firmly on your characterization here. The text actively de-emphasizes the ego depletion models you are attacking. It explicitly states that willpower is overrated.
Oh, really?
Yes. The book actually champions choice architecture. Let me give you an example from the text. Anne Thorndike's study at the Massachusetts General Hospital cafeteria. She simply rearranged the room to make water bottles more visually prominent than soda.
Yeah, I am familiar with the study.
Then you know that without asking anyone to summon their willpower, without draining any metaphorical battery, water consumption skyrocketed and soda sales plummeted. By relying on automatic visual cues, choice architecture bypasses the prefrontal cortex's decision-making fatigue entirely. That is not debunked science. That is a verifiable, peer-reviewed demonstration of how environment shapes behavior.
Look, that is superficial tweaking. Rearranging water bottles in a hospital cafeteria is a perfectly valid intervention for microbehaviors, yes? But it fails entirely to address the underlying hazardous science of the book's broader claims regarding life-altering transformation, which brings me to a much more insidious attack angle.
Which is?
The profound survivorship bias and weird-centric blindness woven into the text.
Survivorship bias? The author explicitly states he is not a master of the topic, but rather someone who used these specific tools to slowly rebuild his life after a catastrophic brain injury.
And that is a very moving, personal narrative, but look at the core mantra of the text. Let me quote it directly. You do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. Do you realize how philosophically ruthless that is?
I find it empowering. It focuses you on the actionable process rather than the distant dream.
It is empowering only if you are already in a position of power. It places the entire burden of structural and systemic failure onto the isolated individual. But I disagree that it places the burden unfairly. The book is an operating manual for the variables you can control in your life regardless of your background.
It assumes a baseline of socioeconomic privilege, where everyone has the autonomy, the resources, and the physical safety to meticulously architect their environment. Western individualism frames success as purely personal, completely ignoring the invisible systemic support structures that make that success possible. Furthermore, it completely alienates the neurodivergent.
In what way?
It assumes everyone possesses the baseline executive function to flawlessly execute algorithms like habit stacking and temptation bundling. Executive function is how the brain plans, focuses attention, and juggles multiple tasks. Try telling someone with severe ADHD, someone who has a literal physiological deficit in dopamine regulation and executive function, that their problem is simply that they haven't made their habits obvious or attractive enough. Habit stacking is biologically inaccessible to many without medication.
not just a failure of personal system design. The framework is blind to cognitive variance and structural barriers.
That is an unfair characterization of the text. It absolutely does not ignore biological and cognitive variance. There is an entire chapter dedicated to genetics called The Truth About Talent.
A chapter that is conveniently tucked away at the very back of the book, long after the universal promises have been sold.
But it is there, and it is crucial. The author explicitly states that genes matter, and that people should build habits that align with their big 5 personality traits rather than forcing a mismatch. For example, if you score lower on conscientiousness, he acknowledges you are less likely to be orderly by nature. He actively tells the reader, choose the habit that best suits your biology, not the one that is most popular.
That is a token acknowledgement, and it does absolutely nothing to absolve the framework of its deeper sins. Saying choose a habit that fits your personality completely ignores poverty and structural inequality. Many people do not have the luxury to design their environments.
Sure, but
If you are working 3 jobs just to avoid eviction, your environment is designing you. The entire philosophy assumes a level of control over one's life that is reserved almost exclusively for the upper middle class.
you are critiquing a book about behavioral psychology for not being a comprehensive treatise on global socioeconomic reform. That is completely outside the scope of its objective. It is a tool for behavioral change.
I am critiquing it for its ethical implications, which is where this framework truly reveals its toxicity. We must question the underlying teleology here. What exactly are we optimizing for? Let us look at the ethical dimensions of reducing human consciousness to mechanistic, manipulable algorithms. The book literally draws its foundational logic from Edward Thorndike's puzzle box cats and B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning of rats.
It utilizes the observable science derived from those experiments, yes.
Are we really comfortable equating human behavior, human ambition, and human consciousness to trapped cats pulling levers to get a scrap of fish? When we apply operant conditioning to ourselves, who is the operator? We become both the rat and the scientist in the laboratory, completely splitting our psyche in two. This framework systematically erodes the concept of free will, replacing spontaneous human choice with automated, reflexive behavioral loops.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. It doesn't erode free will. It actually liberates it. By automating the mundane foundational aspects of life, like exercise, diet, and basic productivity, your conscious mind is freed up to focus on higher-order problems.
No,
It takes the friction out of daily living so you can actually exercise your free will on things that matter, rather than exhausting it on deciding whether to go to the gym.
It does not liberate people. It provides a scientifically validated toolkit for corporate exploitation. Look at the very examples the book uses to prove its points. The author points to the food industry's hyperpalatable bliss points of salt, sugar, and fat. He points to the dopamine-driven feedback loops of technology and social media platforms.
Right.
He analyzes these deeply exploitative, addictive mechanisms and says, here, apply these exact same mechanisms to yourself.
Yes, to harness them for your own good. To use temptation bundling to connect something you need to do with something you want to do. It takes the very weapons of modern distraction and turns them into powerful tools of construction.
To borrow a phrase from Audre Lorde, you cannot use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house. Teaching individuals to apply the psychological manipulation tactics of predatory corporations to their own minds does not result in self-actualization. It results in a sophisticated architecture of self-imposed subjugation.
That's a huge leap.
You are turning humans into hyper-optimized productivity machines, meticulously tracking their daily paperclips, absolutely terrified of breaking the chain. You are stripping away soul, spontaneity, and authentic human experience in the name of marginal gains. You are not building an identity. You are building a cage.
But if the cage allows you to,
take this uncomfortable knowledge and use it to build your mental immunity against those who would reduce your deeply complex humanity to a predictable, exploitable algorithm. Remember to subscribe to Cognitive Dose.